we are going to be examining one of the most urgent issues confronting Nigeria's future, which is education. It's a pleasure to have you join us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of why we are here. This conversation is actually driven by evidence. According to UNICEF, 1 in every 5 out of school children in the world is Nigerian, with about 10.5 million children aged 5 to 14 years currently out of school, and despite primary education being officially free and compulsory. To start with, what's actually inspired your leadership of Ilimi Children Fund?
Thank you so much for that question. So to answer that straightforwardly, I think that boils down to who I am as a person. I have worked in the development space for close to 10 years now, ranging from the agricultural sector to the health sector to the gender space and now the education. And throughout the work that I have done, I have interfaced with rural communities. I have seen the staggering numbers of out-of-school children, and that has molded me into, being a passionate advocate for education in Nigeria, especially for the girl child, putting inclusion at the heartbeat of everything I do. Now, Ilmi Children's Fund is an NGO that has been in existence for close to 7 years and is looking at the issues, the statistics you have rightly discussed this morning, to say that, how can we improve access, how can we improve quality and still improve safety? And seeing that alignment with, my background and everything that I work for, I felt that, being the leader would definitely kind of move my expertise to push the initiative of this NGO forward to ensure that we are programming not just for programming purposes, but really to address the crises and the issues that we face in the educational sector today in Nigeria.
All right, thank you very much for that. So with your experience put together, what would you outline? What are the things you would say that are actually the root cause of learning crisis in Nigeria?
That's a very deep and difficult question to answer. It would take the whole day to dissect what the root causes are. They are multidimensional. There's so many layers to the crisis that we face in the education sector today. So I'm going to try to break it down based on, the different lenses that we see. The government lens, for example, the systems lens, that is, we're going to look at the community lens, and we're going to look at the teacher lens as well. So for the government, we know that they are the duty bearers for policy formulation, policy implementation, budget implementation and enforcement. And in the education sector, it is no denial that we have a huge gap starting from policy formulation. In most settings where we have advanced countries, for example, you would see that at the point of policy drafting and formulation, all stakeholders are being included. For the education sector in Nigeria, it is actually fine to say that it is mostly top-bottom approach. So we kind of perceive what the needs would be for this sector. We perceive what should be done, how we should intervene, and we formulate a policy without putting into effect the realities that the community faces or what the community really needs. So there is a huge gap in policy formulation, and ultimately my ask would be that if we want adequate and impactful policies, it would be prime to include and infuse the realities of not just the teachers, but even the students themselves. We need to have a bottom-up approach for our policy formulation. The second thing is the gap between policy itself and implementation. Because Nigeria as a country, believe me, we have so many policies. We have a lot of policies. But the issue is a policy is only as effective as its implementation, and a document sitting on the shelf is just that. What effort are we putting in to ensure that implementation is top-notch, right? And there is a gap between policy and the uptake of that policy, as well as the enforcement of that policy. And I'll give a very quick example.
All right.
We have the Child's Right Act, and we have the 9 years compulsory, free and compulsory basic education. But
which is the primary school,
and the first 3 years in the secondary school. Yes. But when you and I step out of this place now, you can literally see students within that age category roaming about on the street. Where is the implementation and enforcement? So we have the law that says compulsory and free. But is it really compulsory? Is there anybody pushing for the implementation of that law in that regard? Let's not even talk about going back to the deep north, where you have a lot of children on the street begging, right? A lot of children hawking, and you have a lot of girls back home helping with unpaid domestic activities at home, helping their mothers do one or two things. A lot of people are out of school. A lot of people are out of school, and there is nothing really being done to really push for the implementation of that policy. A lot of organizations are doing so much that they can. The government is doing a lot as well, but we still have a lot of children out of school. Now, speaking about corruption, that is another layer, because we do have a budget. Every year we have a budget for the education sector. The budget is one thing, right? Spending, tracking, and being accountable for that budget is another thing. Pushing that budget to the right channel is another thing. And I don't think that Nigeria as a system, we have all this puzzled out properly. So in addition to increasing budgets, or rather in addition to low budgets that we currently have for this sector, we're not even sure that the budget is being channeled in the right direction. And there is no accountability mechanism to really show and, be transparent enough with what we're using the money for. Speaking about the community as well, I think there is a lot of restrictive gender and social norms that are hindering the uptake of education, especially for the girl child, right? A lot of cultures, a lot of gender norms. For example, the early marriage that we keep talking about, and, the guideline for even re-entry for girls that have experienced teenage pregnancy or had to drop out because of early marriage and are willing to go back to school. The system is yet to fully define what that guideline, what the pathway for that re-entry is. And as such, that is also a learning crisis. But beyond all this, there's something that I call learning readiness. And I think we have a deficit in that area. We keep looking at the outputs, how many children are in school, how many children go to school, how many teachers are in this school, do we have the infrastructure? However, you could have all that and learning will still not be taking place. And that is because the children are not ready to learn. And there are a lot of underlying conditions for that. It could be psychological, it could be emotional, it could be every other thing, because education is not a standalone factor. It is not a standalone ecosystem. It is at the intersection of every other thing: safety, poverty, gender-based violence, climate change, security, for example, food security as well. And if any of these other factors are not stable, then education is automatically affected. So all these kind of bundle together to give us the crisis that we see today. Children that go to school, they don't really learn. They are not really taking up what you're giving to them. They just go to school, wear their uniform, go to school, have some fun time, they play, they come back home, but they are not taking it up.
There is a compulsory education system, which is the primary and the first 3 years of secondary school.
Yeah.
But in Nigeria today, we still have a lot of those children out of school. That now brings me to ask if these children cannot decide that I don't want to go to school. Maybe I just want to pick up skill and learn,
Again, learning does not have to be in school. I think we have the formal education system, we have the informal, and a lot of people that are currently successful, that are within civil service space, that are, working with the private sector, working with the NGO space, they have actually gone through informal education. So that is not something that we ignore as well. But the question that you asked, which is very fundamental, is if a child has the right or has the say in whether they should go to school or not. Now, for, based on our law, until you're 18, you're still a child, right?
Yes.
And you're still under the guidance and the ruling, the decisions of your guardian or your parent. And that is why it's basically on the parent at this point in time. However, there's a factor that we need to not ignore, that without economic stability, even the parent is bound to make some rash decisions, some irrational decisions as well. For example, if there is poverty, if there is hunger, or let me even say starvation, the first point of thought for a parent wouldn't be to send my child to school. It would be to have stability in my home.
You're right.
And if that means sending my kids hawking to go and sell groundnuts, to sell corn, to sell one or two things to bring in some income, or even to send a girl child to a faraway state to be a domestic house help, for example, just to bring income, you can imagine a parent waiting back in the rural setting for a child, a minor, working in a state in the south or in the east to send back home money, 10,000, 15,000. That is the means of livelihood, for example. So unless there is economic stability, unless the family is stable enough, you cannot quickly dive into the decision of taking up education.
What kind of approach do you think that our education in Nigeria needs?
First of all, we need to even talk about the compensation for teachers.
That's the salary.
That is the salary for teachers. We need to talk about that, because a lot of teachers, are, although very motivated, they love what they do it with passion. But you would clearly say that when, typically when you have a career day in any school, you can hardly see a child
say that I want to be a teacher,
because it is not an attractive role.
You're right.
Despite their importance, despite how pivotal they are, they groomed all of us, right? Every one of us was shaped by a teacher. But somehow we continue to just, leverage the fact that they have taken it as, a role, just their contribution to the country, and we do not really factor what we can do for them. We can actually look at their compensation. We can look at developmental training, social support for them. We can look at, curriculum review. We can look at integrating their views, the teachers' views, in our policy formulation, because ultimately they hold the system, and we cannot afford to let that grip that they have on the system go to waste.
So how do we begin to change the narrative to make these kids, interested in learning?
That's the learning readiness we're talking about. And I think learning readiness is closely associated with an effective system. Because typically when a school is fully, equipped in terms of infrastructure, in terms of capable teachers, as a system, the education sector needs to be integrated. It needs to be more responsive. It needs to be inclusive, as a matter of fact, to everything that we have said, because it is part of a broader ecosystem. It is not a standalone sector. We have to look at safety and security. We have to look at food insecurity. We have to look at poverty. So it's only by addressing these pockets of concerns, these social, adversities, I would call them, that we can actually see an improvement in our learning. We cannot treat it in isolation. We have to have an integrated approach for this.
Hunger is also a major factor.
I would say that there are a lot of programs, both government programs and developmental programs, from CSOs and even CBOs, that focuses on interventions that focuses on this very question that you have asked. Retention and re-entry for not just girls but boys as well to school. And retention is very critical because that is where you have the dropouts, which translates to so many other things. You have teenage pregnancy, you have drug abuse, for example, all linked to school dropouts or, poor learning outcomes as well. But I think that beyond parents definitely have a part to play. They have to be fully engaged in that learning process of their child. They have to monitor where the child is, what you're doing. I mean, you're the full guardian and the full person responsible for this kid. But beyond the parent, the community also has a part to play. We have policies that we're not uptaking optimally. We have enrollment issues. The community can actually do something about that. We have infrastructure that has been put in place, and you have items are being vandalized, and the community is responsible for whatever school that they have within their vicinity. So that is also a thing. And CSOs, civil society organizations, have a role to play as well. So many times we design interventions for intervention's sake without really factoring in the lived realities on ground, right? So we also advocate that CSOs and CBOs not just, execute projects, but execute projects that the community really needs, that is led by the community, and there's shared ownership, so that when you extract yourself, they can actually sustain whatever that initiative is, right? And for our government, it's the whole gamut of, having a proper policy in place, having the implementation and enforcement mechanisms for these policies, and ensuring that the livelihood component of interventions is being embedded in most of these approaches.
Nobody exists in isolation, and we can't leave everything to government. And I must commend what your organization, Ilimi Children Fund, is doing. Despite everything, what is giving you this assurance, the hope for the future of education in Nigeria?
That's a very tricky question.
Okay.
But it has a very simple answer. Hope is all that we have. And we cannot afford to lose that hope. We are responsible for the next generation. Losing that hope means failing them, right? And Nigeria is a very resilient nation. Not to say that we are deserving of anything that is currently happening. No, we are not, but we are very resilient. And there's a lot of effort for making the education sector as a national priority at this point in time. So we're optimistic that even the government is actually shifting the focus in that regard, making it a national priority. The budget has increased from 2024, as we have seen, even though it has yet to reach the benchmark of UNESCO. That's 15 to 20% of the national budget. You should actually push that to education, and we're still seeing it at 7%, 4%, but we're optimistic. Be it skill, be it knowledge, be it the infrastructure, be it, everything, technical support. And we see that happening. So we are very hopeful and optimistic, right? And that is all that we have at this point in time.
I wish we have all of the day to, keep having this conversation, but time is fast spent.
Yeah.
Abuja, I'm so glad you're still very much with us. We have Mrs. Miriam Mukhtar Ali, and she's been doing justice to all of her questions this morning so far. She's Executive Director, Ilimi Children's Fund. It's a pleasure to have you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
Today's conversation actually reminds us that behind every statistics is a child, a teacher, and a community that is striving for a better future. The evidence is clear with the statistics we've given so far. Solving Nigeria's education crisis requires more than building classrooms, like she mentioned. It requires investing in teachers, protecting schools, strengthening systems, and ensuring that every child not only goes to school, but also interested in learning. My name is Grace Eniolanimi. I'm saying bye for now.
Oh, time went by fast. At any point, were you listening?
What?
Were you listening?
Yeah.
Oh. The good thing I didn't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.